What happens when one of Britain's most beloved actresses walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a friendly chat, only to be blindsided by a host who seems determined to pick a fight? In just 34 seconds, a single dismissive comment from Denise Welch transformed what should have been a light-hearted conversation into one of the most uncomfortable moments in Loose Women history. This is the story of how Brenda Blethyn, known for her warmth and professionalism, found herself pushed to her absolute limit by a host who seemed to forget the meaning of respect. The studio lights were bright that morning, just like any other day on Loose Women. Brenda Blethyn had arrived early, excited to talk about her new project. She had been on the show before and always enjoyed the relaxed atmosphere. The crew greeted her warmly. Makeup was applied, and within minutes, she was walking onto the set to the sound of applause from the studio audience. She smiled and waved, settling into her seat next to the panel. Denise Welch sat at the head of the table, flanked by Colleen Nolan and Janet Street Porter. The energy in the room felt different today, though Brenda could not quite put her finger on why. Denise started the interview with what seemed like a compliment. She said, "Brenda, lovely to have you here. You have been acting for what, 100 years now?" She laughed at her own joke, but it came across more mocking than playful. The audience gave an uncertain chuckle, unsure if they should laugh. Brenda smiled politely and replied, "Well, not quite 100, but it certainly feels like it some days." She tried to keep the mood light, hoping Denise would move on to more substantial questions. But the awkward tension was already building in the room. Janet shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing at Denise with a look that suggested she sensed something was off. Colleen busied herself with her notes, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Even the crew members standing behind the cameras exchanged worried glances. Denise continued, leaning back in her chair with an air of superiority that was impossible to miss. Her body language screamed arrogance. She asked, "So tell us about this new show. I mean, is it really that different from everything else you have done? It all seems a bit samey to me, if I am being honest." The words hung in the air like a slap across the face. You could feel the collective intake of breath from the studio audience. Brenda's smile faltered for just a moment before she composed herself, drawing on years of professional experience to maintain her poise. She took a slow, measured breath and responded, "Actually, this role is quite different. The character has incredible depth, and the writing is some of the best I have worked with in years. The story tackles some really important social issues in a way that feels genuine and necessary." Her voice remained steady, professional, refusing to take the bait that Denise was so obviously dangling in front of her. But Denise was not done. Not even close. She waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away Brenda's response like an annoying fly. She said, "Oh, come on, Brenda. You play the same type of character every time. The downtrodden woman, the struggling mother, the victim. Do not you ever get bored of it? I know I would be absolutely bored out of my mind." The other panelists visibly tensed. You could see their shoulders stiffen, their expressions freeze. Janet looked at Denise with wide eyes, clearly shocked by the blatant rudeness. Her mouth opened slightly, as if she wanted to say something but could not quite find the words. Colleen interjected quickly, desperately trying to defuse the situation before it got any worse. She said, "I think what Denise means is that you are so good at those roles. You make them iconic. You bring such humanity to every character." Brenda nodded slowly, appreciating the attempt to smooth things over and redirect the conversation. But the damage was already done. The hostile intent behind Denise's words was unmistakable. Brenda maintained her composure with remarkable grace, though if you looked closely, you could see her jaw tighten slightly. Her hands, resting on the table, pressed together a bit more firmly. She replied, her voice measured and clear, "I choose roles that resonate with me, that tell important stories about real people living real lives. If that seems repetitive to some, then perhaps they are not paying close enough attention to the nuances. Each character is unique, with their own struggles, their own triumphs, their own journey. It was a perfectly measured response, dignified yet firm, professional yet personal. The audience murmured in approval, sensing that Brenda was holding her ground with class. Several people nodded their heads in agreement. Denise, however, seemed to interpret this thoughtful response as a challenge, rather than a reasonable answer. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and you could see her spine straighten as if preparing for battle. Denise leaned forward aggressively, her expression hardening into something almost cruel. She said, "Nuances? Really? I think audiences just see the same performance over and over. Maybe it is time to try something new. Shake things up a bit. Branch out. Do something unexpected for once. You are not getting any younger, after all." The comment was delivered with a smile, but there was pure venom in it. The studio audience gasped audibly, and this time it was loud enough that even the cameras picked it up. Several people in the audience shook their heads in disbelief. Janet covered her mouth with her hand, looking absolutely mortified that this was happening on her show. Her face had gone pale. Colleen whispered urgently, "Denise," in a warning tone that carried a clear message to stop, but Denise ignored her completely. She kept her eyes fixed on Brenda, waiting for a reaction, almost daring her to respond. Brenda sat up even straighter in her chair, her posture impeccable, despite the emotional assault she was enduring. Her eyes fixed on Denise with a steady, unwavering gaze. She spoke slowly, deliberately, making sure every single word landed with precision. She said, "I am proud of my work. Every single role I have taken has been a conscious choice, made with care and consideration. I have been fortunate enough to work with talented writers and directors who respect what I bring to their projects. They trust me to bring depth and truth to the characters they create." Her voice was calm and steady, but there was steel beneath it now. A strength that could not be shaken. She was not going to let Denise belittle decades of acclaimed, award-winning work. The audience began to clap, and it grew louder and louder, showing their overwhelming support for Brenda. People were not just politely applauding. They were making a statement. Denise looked around the studio, clearly annoyed and perhaps a bit surprised that the audience was not on her side. Her confident smirk began to fade. Rather than backing down or softening her approach, Denise doubled down on her aggressive tactics. Her voice took on an even more condescending tone. She said, "Well, I suppose some people are content to stay in their comfort zone, doing the same thing over and over again. Personally, I think that is a bit lazy, if we are being totally honest here. If you are not challenging yourself, pushing boundaries, trying new things, then what is the point of even being in this industry?" The insult was barely veiled now, hanging in the air like toxic smoke. Janet could not contain herself any longer. Her professional restraint finally snapped. She jumped in, her voice sharp and clear, saying, "Hang on just a minute, Denise. I think that is completely unfair, and frankly, quite offensive. Brenda has one of the most respected careers in British television and film. She has won countless awards and touched millions of people with her performances. There is absolutely nothing lazy about consistently delivering brilliant, moving performances year after year." Her tone made it clear she was not going to sit by silently anymore. Colleen nodded vigorously in agreement, her face flushed with emotion. She added passionately, "Absolutely. Janet is completely right. Brenda, I have always admired your work so much. You bring such authenticity and heart to every single role. People connect with your characters because they feel real, because you make them real." Brenda smiled at them both gratefully, genuinely touched by their support and willingness to speak up for her. It meant more than they probably knew in that moment. But Denise was visibly irritated now, her face reddening with anger at being contradicted by her own panelists. She snapped harshly, "Oh, please. Are we all going to sit here and pretend like she is some sort of national treasure now? She is an actress, not royalty. She is not special. She does a job, just like everyone else. The comment was so far out of line, so unnecessarily cruel, so that even the camera operators could be seen in the background, exchanging shocked glances and shaking their heads. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted completely from uncomfortable to outright hostile. You could cut the tension with a knife. Brenda's expression finally changed in a way that everyone could see. The polite, professional smile was completely gone now, replaced by a look of genuine hurt mixed with rising anger. Her eyes glistened slightly, though she fought to hold back any tears. She said quietly, her voice trembling just slightly, "I never claimed to be anything special or above anyone else. I have never asked to be put on a pedestal or treated differently. I simply came here today to talk about a project I care deeply about, something I poured my heart into. And instead, I am being attacked and ridiculed for no apparent reason. I do not understand what I have done to deserve this treatment." Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, revealing just how deeply Denise's comments had stung. How much pain was hiding beneath her professional exterior. The audience was completely silent now, everyone holding their breath to see what would happen next. The silence was deafening, heavy with anticipation and discomfort. Denise rolled her eyes dramatically and dismissively, making an exaggerated expression of mock sympathy. She said with dripping sarcasm, "Oh, here we go with the dramatics. Playing the victim again, are we? How incredibly fitting and predictable." It was the absolute breaking point. The moment had arrived. Janet slammed her hand down on the table hard enough that it made a loud bang, making everyone in the studio jump in their seats. She said loudly and forcefully, "That's enough, Denise. That's more than enough. You are being incredibly rude, hostile, and disrespectful to a guest who has done absolutely nothing to deserve this appalling treatment. This is not what we do here." Colleen quickly added, her voice firm and unwavering. "I completely agree with Janet. This is not what Loose Women is about at all. We are supposed to have interesting, respectful conversations, not vicious ambushes. This has gone way too far." Denise looked at her fellow panelists with complete disbelief written all over her face, clearly not expecting them to turn on her so publicly and so forcefully. She said defensively, her voice rising, "I am just being honest with our guest. Someone has to ask the tough questions around here. Someone has to say what everyone else is thinking." Janet shook her head firmly, her expression one of pure disgust. She replied sharply, "There is a massive difference between asking tough questions and launching personal attacks, Denise. You have crossed that line today, and you crossed it early on. This is not journalism. This is bullying." The tension in the room was so thick and heavy you could cut it with a knife. Every eye in the studio was locked on the panel. Brenda sat perfectly still, watching the exchange unfold with wide eyes, her hands still clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white from the pressure. Denise turned back to Brenda, her face flushed with anger. She said, "Fine. If you cannot handle a bit of honest criticism, maybe you should not be doing interviews." That was it. The final straw. Brenda stood up slowly, as her chair scraping against the floor. The entire studio went silent. She looked directly at Denise and said with perfect clarity, "I have been in this industry for over 40 years. I have worked with some of the most demanding directors and challenging material imaginable. I can handle criticism just fine when it is constructive and comes from a place of genuine interest. What I will not tolerate is being disrespected by someone who seems more interested in creating drama than having a real conversation." The audience erupted into applause. People were standing, cheering for Brenda. Janet and Colleen were clapping too, both looking relieved that someone had finally said what needed to be said. Denise sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, clearly not expecting this response. Brenda continued, her voice steady and strong. She said, "I came here today with nothing but good intentions. I wanted to share something I am passionate about with people who I thought would be interested. Instead, I have been mocked, insulted, and treated with contempt. I do not know what I did to deserve this treatment, but I do know that I will not sit here and endure it any longer." She reached down and unclipped her microphone with practiced ease. The sound technician in the booth looked panicked, unsure whether to try to stop her. Denise finally found her voice and said, "Oh, do not be so dramatic. Sit down." But her words lacked conviction now. She sounded defensive, almost desperate. Brenda shook her head. She replied, "I think I have been more than patient. I wish the rest of you all the best." She nodded to Janet and Colleen, who both gave her sympathetic looks. Janet mouthed the words, "We are so sorry." Brenda turned and began walking off the set. Her steps were measured, dignified. She held her head high despite the clear emotion on her face. The cameras followed her every move, capturing the moment for millions of viewers watching at home. Denise called after her, "Brenda, come back. Let us talk about this." But it was too late. The words sounded hollow, insincere. Brenda did not even pause. She kept walking until she disappeared behind the backstage curtain, leaving a stunned studio in her wake. The moment Brenda left, chaos erupted. Janet immediately turned to Denise and said, "What were you thinking? That was absolutely appalling." Colleen added, "You completely humiliated her. And for what? To prove some point?" Denise tried to defend herself, sputtering, I was trying to have an honest conversation." Janet was not having it. She shot back, "That was not honesty, Denise. That was cruelty. There is a massive difference." The director in the control room was shouting into headsets, trying to figure out how to salvage the show. The audience sat in stunned silence, many of them whispering to each other about what they had just witnessed. Some were filming on their phones, knowing they had just seen something that would be talked about for years. On the panel, Denise looked around, seeming to finally realize the gravity of what had happened. She said weakly, "She did not have to leave. I would have apologized." Colleen looked at her incredulously. She said, "You had plenty of opportunities to apologize while she was sitting right here. Instead, you kept pushing and pushing until she had no choice but to walk away." Janet added, her voice sharp, "You need to take a long, hard look at yourself, Denise. This is not acceptable behavior, guest or not." The producers were frantically signaling to cut to a commercial break. The floor manager was making cutting motions across his throat, desperate to end this disaster. Denise sat there, her confidence completely shattered. She mumbled, "I did not mean for it to go this far." But the damage was done. Janet stood up, her face flushed with anger. She said, "You know what? I do not even want to sit here right now. I need a break." She walked off the set as well, leaving just Colleen and a shell-shocked Denise sitting at the table. Colleen looked directly into the camera and said, "We are going to take a quick break. We will be right back." Her voice was strained, professional training kicking in, even in the midst of chaos. As soon as they cut to commercial, Denise stood up and said, "I need to go find her. I need to explain." But Colleen grabbed her arm. She said firmly, "No, you have done enough. Let her have some space." Denise pulled away, looking desperate now. She said, "But I did not mean to upset her that much. I thought we were just having a spirited debate." Colleen shook her head in disbelief. She replied, "A spirited debate? Denise, you insulted her career, her age, her talent. That was not a debate. That was a character assassination." Behind the scenes, Brenda was in her dressing room, being comforted by the makeup artist and a producer. The producer kept apologizing profusely, saying, "We had no idea she was going to do that. We are so sorry." Brenda wiped her eyes carefully, trying not to smudge her makeup too badly. She said, "It is not your fault. I did not expect to be treated like that." The makeup artist handed her tissues, looking furious on her behalf. She said, You were amazing out there. You stood up for yourself with such grace." Janet knocked on the door and peeked her head in. She asked, "Can I come in?" Brenda nodded, and Janet rushed over to give her a hug. She said, "I am so sorry, Brenda. That was completely unacceptable. Denise was out of line from the very first question." Brenda hugged her back, grateful for the support. She said, "Thank you for speaking up. It meant a lot." Janet pulled back and looked at her seriously. She replied, "Of course. What she did was wrong, and I was not going to sit there and let it continue." Back on set, the commercial break was ending. Colleen sat alone at the table, looking uncomfortable. The director decided to bring in a pre-recorded segment to fill time rather than continue with the live show. Denise had been pulled aside by senior producers who were reading her the riot act. One of them said sternly, "Do you have any idea what you have just done? Brenda Blethyn is one of the most respected actresses in this country, and you treated her like garbage on live television." Denise tried to interrupt, but the producer held up a hand. They continued, "The phones are ringing off the hook with complaints. Social media is going absolutely insane. This is a public relations nightmare." Denise looked down at her feet, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. She said quietly, "I will apologize. On air. I'm right now." The producers shook their head. They said, "It is too late for that. Brenda has left the building. She does not want to come back. And frankly, I do not blame her." In her dressing room, Brenda was gathering her things. The producer asked, "Is there anything we can do? Anything at all?" Brenda smiled sadly and said, "No, thank you. I just want to go home." Janet stayed with her, helping pack up her belongings. She said, "You handled that with such dignity. I do not know how you stayed so calm for as long as you did." Brenda sighed. She replied, "I have dealt with difficult people before, but never quite like that. Never with such open hostility for no reason." As Brenda prepared to leave through the back exit to avoid any waiting press, she paused. She turned to Janet and said, "Please tell Colleen I said goodbye." She was lovely. Janet promised she would. Then Brenda added, "As for Denise, I hope she figures out whatever is bothering her, but I will not be returning to this show." With that, she walked out of the studio, leaving behind one of the most talked about moments in daytime television history. What started as a routine interview became a masterclass in grace under fire. Brenda Blethyn walked onto that set, expecting a pleasant conversation about her work, the thing she loved and had dedicated her life to. Instead, she faced a barrage of insults disguised as questions, delivered by a host who seemed determined to diminish her accomplishments. From the very first backhanded comment about her age to the repeated dismissals of her talent, Denise Welch created an environment that was hostile and uncomfortable. What made it worse was the public nature of the attack, broadcast live to millions of viewers who watched in horror as a beloved actress was treated with such contempt. But through it all, Brenda maintained her composure. She answered each insulting question with dignity and professionalism. She defended her work without being defensive, explained her choices without being condescending. She gave Denise multiple opportunities to change course, to steer the conversation back to something productive. Each time, Denise chose to escalate instead. The breaking point came not from a single comment, but from the accumulation of disrespect. When Denise dismissed her concerns and told her to sit down after she had made the decision to leave, it was clear that there was no remorse, no understanding of the harm that had been caused. The other panelists, Janet and Colleen, showed incredible solidarity. They could have stayed silent, uncomfortable, but unwilling to create more drama. Instead, they spoke up. They defended Brenda when she needed allies. They called out Denise's behavior in real time, refusing to let it slide under the guise of honest conversation. Their support meant everything in that moment, showing that not everyone in the studio had lost sight of basic decency and respect. The audience, too, made their feelings clear. Their applause for Brenda and their stunned silence at Denise's comments spoke volumes. When Brenda finally stood up and delivered her final statement, it was powerful, precisely because it came from a place of hurt rather than anger. She did not shout or throw insults back. She simply stated the truth. She had come with good intentions and been met with contempt. She had been patient and received more mockery in return. Her decision to leave was not dramatic or impulsive. It was the natural response of someone who had been pushed beyond what any guest should have to endure. The image of her walking off that set, head held high despite the visible emotion on her face, became iconic. It was a moment of quiet strength that resonated with everyone who had ever been unfairly criticized or attacked. In the aftermath, as chaos erupted on set and behind the scenes, one thing became crystal clear. Denise had made a catastrophic error in judgment. What she thought would be provocative questioning or spirited debate was actually just bullying. Her attempts to justify her behavior after Brenda left only made things worse. The claim that she would have apologized rang hollow when she had so many chances to do so while Brenda was still there. The suggestion that Brenda was being overly dramatic by leaving was particularly galling, given that Denise had spent the entire interview being needlessly aggressive. The staff rallied around Brenda, apologizing and trying to make amends for something that was not their fault. The producers scrambled to contain the fallout, knowing they had a major incident on their hands. Meanwhile, Denise faced the consequences of her actions, pulled aside by senior staff, and confronted with the reality of what she had done. Her confidence evaporated when faced with genuine accountability. The excuses and justifications fell flat. There was no spinning this as anything other than what it was. In a respected guest being mistreated by a host who forgot that her job was to facilitate conversation, not create confrontation. As Brenda left through the back exit, she did so with her dignity intact. She had every right to be angry, to lash out, to say things she might regret later. Instead, she took the high road. She wished Colleen well, acknowledged Janet's support, and even expressed a kind of pity for Denise, hoping she would figure out whatever was driving her behavior. It was a level of grace that few people could have mustered in the same situation. The decision to never return to the show was not made in the heat of the moment. It was a clear boundary being set by someone who knew her worth. This incident became more than just a daytime television drama. It became a conversation about respect, about how we treat people, especially those we invite into our spaces. It highlighted the difference between asking difficult questions and being deliberately cruel. It showed the importance of standing up for others when they are being mistreated, as Janet and Colleen did. It demonstrated that walking away from a toxic situation is not weakness, it is self-respect. And perhaps most importantly, it reminded everyone watching that no amount of fame or success should subject someone to being treated as less than human. Brenda Blethyn walked into that studio as a guest, an accomplished actress with decades of acclaimed work behind her. She left as something more, a symbol of dignity in the face of unwarranted hostility. Denise Welch, meanwhile, learned a harsh lesson about the consequences of letting ego and aggression overtake professionalism. The 34 seconds it took for that first dismissive comment to land set in motion a chain of events that would be remembered long after that day's broadcast ended. It was a reminder that words matter, that respect matters, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in your own humiliation,